A horse-drawn cart stands outside the carpenter's house. Soldiers and workers are loading crosses onto the cart from his workshop as the carpenter watches. Philomena approaches from the other side of the house. Just then, Barabbas arrives. The carpenter spots him and calls out, "Come, Barabbas." Barabbas, sitting on the porch, asks, "Why are they loading so many crosses today?" The carpenter replies, "Pilate sentenced many people to crucifixion yesterday. That's why they're taking them." Barabbas looks at him and says, "For every cross you make, a life will be lost." The carpenter lowers his head with guilt and quietly says, "I've decided. I'll stop making crosses next month." And then he asks, "Why are you here, Barabbas?" Barabbas replies, "You should join the protest. We've already made our final plea to Caiaphas, but he ignored it. The date for the protest has been set. I'm here to invite you to join us." Philomena, sitting nearby, asked, "We're Jews. How can we fight against our own people?" Barabbas turned to her, his voice firm, "You've got racism in your blood, too." The carpenter quickly stepped in. She didn't mean it like that. What she's saying is, we're Jews. If we fight, our own people will see us as traitors. We won't have a normal life anymore. Barabbas stayed silent, thinking. The carpenter continued, "The solution isn't just about fighting. It's about God's mercy. Why don't you go see Jesus?" Barabbas asked, "And what will happen if I do?" The carpenter replied, "Jesus doesn't care about race. He was born into a Jewish family that avoided outsiders, but he visits the homes of the poor and eats with them. He's the Son of God. Tell him your people's struggles. He will listen. He can bring change." Barabbas stood there, deep in thought. Suddenly, Jonas rode in on horseback. "Father, I've been promoted. I'm now a lieutenant commander," he announced with excitement. Everyone cheered. Jesus is resting in the shade of a tree at the base of a mountain, while his disciples talk among themselves. Suddenly, a group of priests and some people who support them approach Jesus. Jesus looks at them with a stern expression and then closes his eyes. The crowd steps forward, and one of them says, "Rabbi, we've come to ask you something." Judas notices them and says, "The rabbi is resting. Come back later." But Jesus wakes up and says, "Let them ask their questions. A person who lives with doubt will never find peace." One of the priests in the crowd says to Jesus, "We know you speak the truth and teach without fear." The priest asks, "Is it right for us to pay taxes to Caesar? Should we pay them or not?" Jesus, who looked at him intently and said, "Are you trying to trap me?" He then asks, "Do you have a coin? Give it to me." The priest hands him a coin. Jesus holds it and asks, "Whose face and name are on this coin?" The priest answers, "It's the king's." Jesus replies, "Then give to the king what belongs to the king, and give to God what belongs to God." The priests glance at each other, speechless. They eventually walk away, whispering among themselves. On their way, one priest says to another, "This man is too clever. How can we find fault with him?" Jesus goes back to lie down under the tree. At a distance, Barabbas approaches Jesus and says, "Greetings, Rabbi." Jesus does not get up. Immediately, Judas asks, "What do you want from the rabbi?" Jesus sits up and looks at Barabbas. Immediately, Barabbas says, "Rabbi, my name is Barabbas. I lead the Gentiles. I've come to ask for your support." One of the disciples asks, "What is it that you want?" Barabbas responds, "In this land, Jews have their own laws, and Gentiles have theirs. Our rights are ignored. For years, we've been treated like less. We're disrespected in life and in death. Jews have separate cemeteries, but when we die, we don't even have a piece of land to bury our bodies. Our bodies are thrown from mountaintops, left for dogs, foxes, and vultures to feast on. What kind of injustice is this, Rabbi?" One of the disciples replies, "That's a fair question, but you should ask Pilate, not our rabbi." Barabbas insists, "I didn't come to ask for justice. I came for support." Another disciple asks, "What kind of support are you asking for?" Barabbas explains, "I've already knocked on every government door, but everything's shut tight. The only option left is protest. Soon, I'll lead a big march. I want your rabbi to join us." A disciple questions, "Do you think the protest will succeed if our rabbi joins?" Barabbas replies confidently, "I truly believe it will. Your rabbi isn't just one man, he's a force. Wherever he goes, thousands follow. I know his every word has power. If he joins my protest, thousands will follow him. With his help, we'll get a proper cemetery for our people." Jesus watches and listens in silence. Suddenly, Barabbas stepped closer to Jesus, knelt down, and pleaded, "Rabbi, will you join our fight?" Jesus, who had been silent, looked at him calmly and replied, "Barabbas, your struggle is to bury the body after death. But my struggle is to let the soul live on after death. Our paths and principles are different." Barabbas quickly said, "Rabbi, don't say that. I know you are fighting for social change." Jesus replied, "You're mistaken, Barabbas. My fight is for the transformation of souls." Barabbas then said, "Rabbi, don't say that. I know if you think you can get burial land for us." Jesus asked, "Do you really believe I can get land for a burial ground?" Barabbas replied eagerly, "I believe. I know your power is great." Jesus looked into his eyes and replied, "Your faith will save you. Through me, you will get land for burial." Excited, Barabbas asked again, "So will you join us?" Jesus stood and said, "I've come to do God's will, not man's." Turning to his disciples, he said, "Come, let's go." As Jesus walked away, Barabbas, still confused, turned to one of the disciples. "Did your rabbi say he'd join us or not?" The disciple answered, "We don't understand what he's saying." "How could you?" Still confused, Barabbas walked away.